Thank you for joining this episode of Politics for Parents. I'm really excited because I have one of my graduate school professors on today to talk about tariffs. I consider myself somewhat pretty conversant in the financial markets and economic news. I've taken a lot of economics courses in my career as a student, and I've worked in financial services for most of my career. But I found that even I was having trouble following where we are with tariffs and what it means for my daily life. Do I need to be worrying about Christmas presents now? What is the rate on China these days? Is it 145% or are we back down to like 20? I have no idea. What's going on with Europe, Canada, Mexico? These things seem to be moving by the day, and this recording is no different because we recorded this episode last Friday, May 30th, and today is Monday, June 2nd, when I'm recording this intro, and who knows what will happen in between. But last Friday, we had recorded this just after the court decision declared on Thursday night that the tariffs, the blanket tariffs, were not legal and had to be rescinded. And then during the course of the day on Friday, we found out that there was an appeal. And now at this time, it seems that the tariffs are able to stay in place while the court process works its way out. And I guess the judges have a chance to fully weigh in on whether the tariffs are legal or not. So anyway, take this with a grain of salt. But at the end of the day, I think the story remains that uncertainty is the word of the day. I'm really excited that we have Dean Stuart Shapiro from the Edward J. Blaustein School of Planning and Public Policy at Rutgers University to talk about tariffs and how they actually work and, what we know and as well as what we don't know. And hopefully this is a little bit of helpful, understanding for you all and helpful information to kind of wrap your head around the complexity of this topic and maybe pay a little less attention to some of the buzzwords and the headlines and, the day-to-day volatility we're seeing, and instead just kind of think more holistically about how these systems work and, help to prioritize what it is you're really going to spend your time worrying about or how you're going to plan for what's ahead. Thanks. Dean Stuart Shapiro, thank you so much for joining me on Politics for Parents this morning. And it's really great to see you again because I don't think we've seen each other since I was a student of yours. And I believe it was the economics of public policy back 10 plus years ago. Oh my God, no, it's been, I think, 15 years or so.
Well,
Wow.
Thanks so much for having me on, Nicole. And to all your listeners, Nicole was an outstanding student. So,
well, thank you.
Remember her fondly.
Appreciate that. Great. Thank you. I will be sure to make sure my kids hear that part so they know. So I'm just going to tell the audience a little bit about you so that they understand the expertise you're bringing to this discussion, because I think it's important, especially in this topic of tariffs. So you're the dean of the Edward J. Blaustein School of Planning and Public Policy. You've been in that role since April of 2023. Prior to joining Rutgers University at the Policy School in 2003, you received a PhD in public policy from Harvard University at the Kennedy School of Government, and you worked at the Office of Management and Budget under Presidents Clinton and George W. Bush. And then the way we know one another, you teach classes in economics, public policy, and politics. You've written 3 books. I know you published numerous articles in The Hill and other publications. You have a podcast at the Blaustein School as well that I listen to from time to time. And I really think it's great to have a voice like yours in this discussion where you're an economist, so you clearly understand tariffs and economic policy, and you also understand the politics in Washington and the policy side. So thank you so much for taking some time to chat with us today.
That's my pleasure, and thanks again for having me.
Okay, so I think just very basically, I don't fully understand how tariffs work. I have a lot of educational background in economics. I've worked in finance for most of the career. But could you just explain to people who are confused by the headlines and I think by some of the skewed information out there, just how do tariffs actually work? 101.
Sure. Tariffs are levies or charges that are placed on imports. So when a company imports something from another country, when it comes across the border, whether that's on land, sea, or air, a fee must be paid to the government for each unit of that good that you import. That fee can be paid by the importing company, it can be paid by the one selling it to them. It matters so much for this. As far as the impact on average citizens, the important thing is it becomes more expensive to get goods into the country because there is a fee for each good that you bring into the country.
Okay, got it. So that is very helpful. And I think one of the things that I've heard recently in this whole debate about tariffs and whether it's good policy or bad or the unprecedented nature of what's happened over the past month or so, it's been said that at one time the United States relied heavily on tariffs to generate revenue, and we've shifted away from that. And in my mind, I just think, okay, the last time we did that, the economy was just very different. Global trade was different. So can you talk to us just a little bit like historical context? When was the last time that the United States actually did rely heavily on tariffs? And can you just provide a little context around why that was the case at that time? And does that similar, I guess, analysis apply today or not?
So tariffs were a major issue in the 19th century. There were heated battles between parties and regions of the country over tariffs. Other than maybe slavery, few issues dominated the political landscape in the 19th century like tariffs did. Southern agricultural interests opposed tariffs because they wanted to export their goods, like cotton, to other countries. And if we put tariffs on other countries will put tariffs on us, and it became harder for Southern farmers to export their cotton and wheat and other goods that were harvested on plantations. Northern industrialists favored tariffs because they were trying to grow an industry, they were trying to grow a manufacturing base in this country, and so they wanted to avoid competition from cheaper European products so that they could grow their industry. The other piece of this, of course, was that the economy was very much smaller in the 19th century by orders of magnitude than it is now. And so as a source of revenue, we could use tariffs to fund the federal government. The income tax, which now provides most of the revenue for the federal government, didn't come into place until the early 20th century. And obviously we have a much bigger government that performs many more functions, and a tariff probably could not fund those functions in this day and age.
Okay. So that all makes sense. And one thing, I want to drill in a little bit is you're talking about the industrialists and wanting to, reduce competition. I mean, I think the thing for me that I think about the economy then, the economy now, and imposing these tariffs as a means of bringing manufacturing back to the United States, say, right, is the thought that, I feel like how do you unwind global trade and where we are with tariffs? I mean, that's just going to be incredibly painful. And the most glaring example is iPhones, right? I mean, are we going to really bring iPhones back to the United States? I think to the Foxconn headlines and the images from those factories, do people want those jobs here? If we do bring those jobs back here, I mean, I think they said, Steve Cook said that, an iPhone would cost $3,500 if we were to make it here. So how do you view that conversation as an economist and someone with this kind of understanding that you have?
Sure. So I'm not going to come out and say that tariffs are never a good idea. You may have a new industry that you want to grow, like the United States in the 19th century. And in order to grow that industry, you need to protect it from foreign competition. But as you noted, that's very different from trying to change an existing situation where global supply chains are incredibly complex and almost everything we buy has some components that are made in other countries in it. And trying to just snap your fingers and reverse that is, as you noted, likely to be a very painful process. I think sort of the way I would describe the choices that a company has when a tariff is imposed is when a company's costs go up, they have three choices. They can take less profits, they can cut costs in other areas, or they can raise prices. Now, it's very easy for many of us to say, well, they should take less profits. But if you're a small business, or even if you are many big businesses, not all, taking less profits may mean going out of business. I mean, why should shareholders invest in you if they can make more money elsewhere? And so those businesses that operate on or close to the margin don't really have the option of taking much less profits, maybe a little bit less here or there. So that leaves them with two other choices: cutting costs which means firing people,
Mm-hmm.
or raising prices, which is probably the most likely option depending on their product and how much people are willing to pay for it. So
Right.
that's why tariffs generally lead to higher prices, is that the first option that many companies will take in the face of increasing costs is raising prices. And so that's why people argue that it's consumers that will pay tariffs, not companies, not other countries. It's going to be those of us that have to pay more for products that will pay the tariff.
Okay. Thank you for that explanation because that is what I'm seeing as well. And there's a survey that caught my attention, I think at the end of April. The Texas Fed does a survey of small business owners, and it really brought out a lot of things I've been seeing in my own community, and especially I do a lot of charitable work and fundraisers, and small businesses that typically sponsor things have been telling me, oh, well, I don't know if I can really have the extra funds right now to do that. Because as you pointed out, I mean, it is an increase in cost. And I appreciate you painting this picture because I know Secretary Bessent, he was testifying before a conference and they asked point blank who pays for these, right? I mean, to be fair, he didn't seem to have much of a good answer. I think partially because, again, we're in a very unprecedented landscape with the sweeping, nature of the tariffs at the time he was doing this testimony. Do we have, what data can we rely upon? I mean, how do you analyze this as someone who's probably rooted in empirical research? Like, how do we actually know this? If you were a policy advisor to the White House, what would you tell them to be looking at to really understand the impact of these tariffs and who it will impact?
Well, things happen slowly in the economy. Other than the stock market, which tends to try and predict impacts rather than reflect actual impacts, you're not going to see things change immediately. And so if a tariff is in place, and we can talk a little bit about sort of the political and legal context, which changed last night as we're recording this actually, but if a tariff, let's say a tariff is put in place and stays in place, then you would expect to see inflation increase over time.
Right.
Not immediately, not the day after the tariff is imposed, but when the numbers for September come out, you would expect to see higher prices. And that's one of the reasons that the Secretary of the Treasury, who's a political appointee of the president, doesn't really want to answer that who pays question, because no one wants to say, we're making you pay higher prices. It's not a desirable political answer to a question.
Got it. And yes, you raised the point that I wanted to get to next is where are we now? Because I drafted the questions for this interview when I first reached out to your office more than a month ago. Then yesterday I was revisiting them and I was chuckling because I feel like so much has transpired and there have been so many headlines and there's been a lot of movement. But up until last night in the court ruling, we really weren't in a very different place because it's on again and off again, and strategic, uncertainty, I think is the term they're using for their negotiation tactics. And the ball keeps moving. Now we have, this taco term, Trump always chickens out. So, I mean, I'm confused because I'm constantly like, should I buy a car now? Should I be shopping for Christmas presents? Are those Italian loafers I wanted more now, or are they not? When is my drop dead date where I need to order that? Where are we? When is this actually going to hit our pocketbooks?
Yeah, what time is it now?
Yeah, I know.
Because it's funny, I saw your questions and thank you for sending them, and I was writing up, an outline of answers yesterday, and then last night things changed. And so it's really hard to answer that question. Just for listeners, because listeners will be listening at a different time than you and I are talking here,
Yeah.
and things may change between now and the day after the Court on International Trade invalidated many of the tariffs that the Trump administration put in place. Of course, the Trump administration will appeal that decision, so we don't know whether those tariffs will go into place or not. And this, in and of itself, combined with the president switching tack frequently on whether or not to impose tariffs is a separate problem from just the tariffs itself. Bad, they will raise prices, they will likely in the long run hurt job loss, etc. But the uncertainty is almost equally problematic. And you noted your uncertainty. Do I buy this? Do I not buy this? And that is certainly a challenge for individual consumers. But it's an even bigger challenge for businesses. Businesses like to plan. They like to
Right.
say, okay, we're going to build this many units over the next 6 months. We're going to need to buy this much stuff to do it. If they can't plan, if they feel like they don't know what the world will look like 2 months from now, 6 months from now, then they can't invest. And then if they can't invest, that affects employment, that affects the economy as a whole. And so not only do the tariffs pose potential problems, but the uncertainty poses problems that may be almost as large for the economy.
Yeah, I mean that is, I think, one of the things I wrestle with, and I hear from people all the time, especially in the investment world. You're always trying to figure out where things are headed, just directionally, even. And there's just so much uncertainty that even if you're trying to underwrite, a project, or you're trying to rate something, there's just a lot going on. And then when it comes to the court decision, I mean, I don't know. I mean, what is that going to do? I know technically it's illegal for them just to impose these sweeping tariffs now, but at the same time, the White House has already said, well, we're just going to use a different provision, because I think some tariffs are still intact because they had used like
Right.
the sector specific tariffs. I think Nvidia's CEO is still lobbying them to allow them to sell chips to China. So where are we now in the wake of that decision? Like, how do we think about it?
Yeah, I mean, part of the uncertainty is generated by the president for sure, but part of the uncertainty is also generated by the ambiguity in the legal status of these tariffs. Obviously, the court ruled yesterday that the president does not have this authority in certain circumstances. You noted there are other circumstances where he still may have this authority. Congress, over time, has passed laws that say the president can impose tariffs under certain circumstances. If there's an emergency, if there's other things that he can make a declaration that exists. They can conduct an investigation and say that the findings of that investigation justify the tariffs. And the Trump administration, because it really, really likes tariffs, is using any and every justification to try and argue that the tariffs are legal. Some of those arguments will work with courts, others will not. I can't tell you which ones will and which ones won't, which brings us back to the uncertainty problem. I don't know 3 months from now which of these tariffs will be in effect and which ones won't. Part of that's, as I said, part of that's because the president may change his mind 5 times between now and then, and part of that is going to be because we don't know how courts will rule on some of the tariffs.
Right. Yeah, because they're going to appeal it. I guess this will wind up in the Supreme Court, or they're going to use a different tactic or a different justification. But you did mention Congress, which is something I'll just like skip ahead a bit here and go to that, because when he initially brought out that board on Liberation Day, which reminded me of the big board in Penn Station, like I was just like, the visual of that was so horrible.
Yep.
And then I know almost immediately people were lobbying their representatives. And then I know there was talk in the Senate. I think the Senate actually passed restrictions on, I think, the tariffs with like Canada and Mexico. There's been talk of maybe the Senate and some of the more moderate members of the Republican Party in the Senate pushing to kind of restrain some of these powers of tariffs. But it seems like people are skeptical that's ever going to hit the House because of Speaker Johnson. Like, he'll never bring it for a vote. So, I mean, is there a path to, for people to lobby their representatives to kind of rein this all in and rein in the president's power?
So it's always a good idea, if you feel strongly about an issue, to call your representative.
Yes.
They tally those calls, they listen to them, and that is one of the very low cost ways to try and influence the policy process. So I never want to buy into the argument that it's hopeless, there's nothing we can do. This is still a democracy. And so people's voices matter. Sometimes that means calling, sometimes that means going out and protesting, sometimes that means trying to convince people on social media of your point of view. As far as the national political picture is concerned, I think there certainly exists anti-tariff majorities in both houses of Congress. However, Republicans, and I won't single out Republicans because Democrats do this too, Republicans don't want to make their president look bad. And so even if you support free trade, even if you think the tariffs are a bad idea, you are going to be reluctant to cast a vote that goes against the desires of your president. Now, if the economy starts to tumble as a result of the tariffs or the resulting uncertainty, as we get closer to the midterm elections, more and more representatives are going to be willing to buck the president and do what's in their self-interest if they think that the tariffs are hurting the economy and hurting their re-election chances. Then they will start to say, wow, we're also getting a lot of calls that are anti-tariff, and maybe me, moderate Republican who believes in free trade, should actually vote for a bill against tariffs, or at least speak out against them. This plays out over a longer period of time. Doesn't mean that things will immediately happen the moment you call. They're going to say, oh, Nicole doesn't want me to do this, I shouldn't do it. It means more that it has a cumulative effect over time in telling elected officials what public opinion in their districts is like.
Right. I mean, I do want to, I'll shift a little bit to the spending bill because I think there are some green shoots in that. And I think one of them is connected to what you're saying here because I know with like the salt tax cap, there's been a lot of reporting on the behind the scenes scuffling between Republicans because there are Republicans that know they're vulnerable in their districts that are going to be up in midterms, and they were feeling the heat on getting the salt cap tax raised, and they were able to get that in the bill that came through the House. And listen, the bill, I'm not going to say anything else about the merits of that bill because I don't agree with most of it. If nothing else, though, to your point, we still are in a democracy, and we still are seeing green shoots of representatives on both sides feeling the heat from constituents. I was at an event with Cory Booker recently who was talking about the sheer volume of calls his office started getting within the first 100 days of this administration that made him realize that he needed to be doing more because people felt like he wasn't representing them appropriately, and that spurred him to take action. So I think, I don't know, at least from where I sit, I feel like somewhat hopeful that there still is an accountability mechanism, that constituents are, being heard, even if their reps are hiding from them and canceling town halls. What do you think in terms of what do you think it would take? You mentioned that if the economy tumbles and things start to unravel a bit, it will be politically damaging to this organization. I mean, I would think that at some point, party loyalty and not wanting to embarrass their president will have to be outweighed by damages. And I think of, Senator Josh Hawley, who's someone I normally never agree with on anything, but he came out about Medicaid cuts and said, he knows he can't have all his constituents get kicked off Medicaid on a bill that he supports. So, what do you think that realistically would look like if this situation got very bad and then they had to take action?
So a lot of it is a question of degree, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think Josh Hawley's almost a special case because I suspect he and an increasing number of people will fall in this category is running for president in 2028 rather than worrying about his seat so much right now. Republicans that are in marginal districts, purple districts, Don Bacon in Nebraska,
Yeah.
maybe even some of our New Jersey representatives Tom Kaine, have to look very closely at the economic impact. And surprisingly, the court decision last night, I saw some people speculate, the court decision essentially may be saving the Republicans from themselves here. It may be allowing them to say, oh, we want tariffs, but the court won't let us. while the court stops the economic impact of those tariffs from harming them. And so, you have conflicted things to root for, but of course what we want is what, makes people's lives better, and not having the tariffs, I think, will by and large do that, even if it allows Republicans to escape some political accountability for favoring those tariffs. So there are a lot of pieces in motion. The accountability mechanism we have in a democracy is elections. And so at the end of the day, that's the ultimate thing. As long as we have free and fair elections next year, then you will see people become increasingly responsive as those elections get closer. And so I do think you'll see it, but I don't think you will see it quickly.
Yeah. I mean, I just was reading some of the GDP revisions and things this morning. So, what are you thinking of just the data that's come out? It seems like it hasn't been as bad as quickly as people thought. I mean, the federal spending drag that people were worried about doesn't seem to have had an impact. It seems like there's been a modest uptick in accumulating inventories because, companies were stocking up. And then consumer sentiment, I saw a recent consumer sentiment number that seemed like it jumped significantly. It just seems like, I guess maybe it's just an emotional response because people are just wiping their brow like, oh, he announced the 50% tariffs on the EU, but then he took them off and then they did the survey. So people felt relatively much better. Like, how are you even viewing the data?
So social media makes this harder, right? Because when something happens like a tariff, you have lots of people screaming. And you see it all over your social media feeds. This is awful. The world's going to end, etc. And the economy doesn't, except in very rare circumstances, and we could think about Lehman and Bear Stearns going under in 2007, the economy generally does not work like that. Things move slowly. The economy, as of January 2025, was good. And many of the things that made it good are still good and strong and all there. And so things like the impacts of reduced federal spending or federal workers getting laid off, etc., are going to take time to work their way through the economy and have an impact before we see that in numbers like unemployment, like inflation, like GDP and productivity. I mean, those things won't happen. They still are good. Economics tell us that, if you impose a tariff, eventually inflation will go up. You will see that eventually, assuming the tariffs go into effect, as we discussed, but it doesn't happen overnight. The economy is much more like a very, very, very big boat that takes a long time to turn around, whether you're trying to fix it or whether you're doing things that harm it.
Got it. Yeah, that certainly makes sense of kind of everything we're seeing now. And I guess, you're an economist, but you're also a person, and you're making decisions for your family, and you're spending money or saving or doing whatever. And I just struggle. I'm like, how do I even stay on top of this? How do I make decisions? We're back to this uncertainty thing. But I don't know. What advice would you have for just people who are busy, they're trying to figure out, I had a friend who got a car and she's like, I just went and got it because my current car was 10 years old and I don't know what's going to happen next, so I just went and bought it. I have a friend who said she's buying Christmas presents already because she's like, I don't know what supply chains are worried, are going to look like by Christmas. I know I still remember COVID and all the supply chain disruptions, and there's reports on China shipping traffic. So I don't know, what are you doing? How are you thinking about this? Is it impacting your daily life or not? The decisions you make?
Yeah, a little bit. We did, my son's birthday is in early May, and we knew we were going to get him an iPad. We bought it earlier than we would have otherwise as the tariffs on China were announced. And so I don't think we were going to not buy it. We're fortunate enough to be in a position that we, could do that. But why not potentially save money? Your friend that bought a car that they would have bought anyway, but they bought it earlier, seems like it makes sense to
Yeah.
me. Particularly when it comes to goods that rely upon Chinese imports, I think though there will probably be some kind of slowdown in imports from China, almost regardless of how this plays out, because the Chinese are making decisions as well. And so those decisions will then lead to other decisions here. And one of the challenges we didn't talk about tariffs is they tend to lead to reciprocal tariffs on things that we sell, and then retaliations from us on those reciprocal tariffs. And so that's a worry as well. I don't know that I would make major changes in the way I bought things, but if you were going to do something anyway, doing it sooner seems like not a bad idea right now. The trickier question, and I talk with my friends about this, is investments. The general lesson is don't try and time the economy.
Yeah.
You really, because you don't know enough, and I don't know enough to do
Yep.
that. So I don't know that I would cash everything out and put it under my mattress at the moment. But am I concerned about the long term health of the economy? Absolutely. And I might be more conservative in any new investments that I make at this point.
Yeah. Yeah, I won't even touch like the capital markets and my concerns with all of that. And that's a whole different discussion. But you do, you raise the point, and I think that's really helpful context for folks that are really feeling lost. And also, I mean, in a way, it's just one of those situations where you're like, is this situation crazy or am I a moron? Like, why is it so hard to figure out what to do? It's good for just the average person to know, no, you're not crazy. No, you're not an idiot. This is just insane. Like, it's an insane situation all around and unprecedented. And, I think you've given us a lot of really helpful insight. I always like to close out a session with just a practical like action someone can take if they're passionate about this or they're concerned. Is there, a newsletter or two you'd suggest people follow, or an account that they should follow that's putting out really good information so they can stay up to speed on this? And also, I know you mentioned calling your representatives, which I think in this scenario is probably one of the most impactful things you can do. If you've got like 15 minutes and you want to stay on top of this, what are a couple key takeaways for folks listening?
Yeah, it's just to pick up on something you said at the beginning of that question. It's reasonable to think things are crazy. The politics right now are crazy, right? We're seeing things in many areas that are relatively unprecedented in our lifetimes, assuming we're about the age you or I are. And so it's not crazy to react to things and be like, oh my goodness, what's going on? That's a natural reaction right now. The economy is still the economy, though, and we don't see those crazy things in the economy right now because, as we said, it's many faceted, it takes time, all of those things. And so just because we are not seeing those doesn't mean you're crazy for reacting to what you're seeing in the headlines with concern and with worry. And then acting upon that worry, acting upon that concern, I definitely think being engaged, being an informed listener, calling your members of Congress, as we discussed, voting in the state elections that are next week, regardless of what your preferences are, be engaged in the process. And there's the important thing, and I try to put this delicately, be humble about what you read and try to expose yourself to different points of view, particularly in your social media consumption. If everything you are reading is the world is ending, you're probably not curating a social media feed that's going to help you become more educated. If everything you're reading is things are great, everything will be fine, you're also probably not curating a social media feed that will allow you to become more educated. So try to balance your consumption of news. Don't obsess and read news 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
That's not healthy either. But when you do, try to make sure it has some balance to it.
Are there any particular, I think, resources on this topic of like the economy or tariffs that you think might be good for folks to follow if they want to feel like they're getting just like solid information, they want to be informed and like understand this? Are there any channels or anyone that you follow that you would recommend?
So I think, and I'm a relatively elite establishment person. And so organs like The Atlantic, like The Economist, like the New York Times tend to have better information than the random person that I could recommend to you on the internet. I'm on Blue Sky. I tend to follow people who know a lot about their subject areas and not follow random political commentators. And so that type of curating of who you follow, I think, is useful. But that doesn't mean I don't have my own blinders on as well and miss some things taking that approach. But I do think, my general rule is if someone can get sued for being wrong, I trust them more than if they're just someone posting on an Instagram feed or a TikTok feed. And so I tend to like those establishment organizations that have a lot to lose for being wrong more than.
All right. Well, that is really helpful information for folks listening and a great reminder. I have almost just completely disengaged from social media except for LinkedIn because I'm tired of ads. But other than that, and it saved me a lot of money, I will say, spending less time on Instagram has had a really strong correlation with my spending habits.
And it's probably not bad for your mental health either.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for the time. I really appreciate, the work you guys do at the Blaustein School, as well as, your time with us here today, providing us a quick primer on tariffs for those of us who still feel kind of overwhelmed. This has been a really great conversation. So thank you.
Thank you for having me, Nicole. I enjoyed it.